The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello there, and this is your moderator, Mike Agron, and welcome from Studio 27 in Sacramento, California, Boston, Massachusetts, Nashville, New Hampshire, and to all of our attendees from across the U.S. and our neighbors to the north in Canada and the rest of the world to today's webinar, Smarter Streets, Right-of-Way Permitting Goes Paperless, and How Forward-Looking Cities Realize the Benefit of Cloud-Based Permitting, sponsored by Invista and hosted by WebAttract, your end-to-end solution provider for informational webinars. Now, for those of you that may not be familiar with Invista, they're based out of Boston, and they provide organizations a cloud-based, map-driven, right-of-way permitting municipal consent capability that ultimately delivers greater transparency, coordination, and citizen awareness. And if you think about today, what's pretty exciting is if you imagine having the ability to be able to see the status of all the right-of-way work permits in real time through a cloud-based map format from your laptop, PDA, or phone, it's not a dream. It's happening in cities across the U.S. and Canada. And today we're going to be talking with Invista and Oracle about two of them. But before we do, I want to give special thank you to our media sponsor, Directions Magazine. Thanks so much to Joe Francique and the team for helping to sponsor today and to have folks attend. We really appreciate it. And when it comes to who registered, we have a very diverse global audience. I want to just let you know a little bit about who's here. Over 300 professionals from 13 countries, 35 states and provinces, representing city managers and engineers, Department of Public Works directors, and really anybody involved in permitting from municipalities, utilities, and government agencies has signed up. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to join industry pioneer Mark Fagan for a behind-the-scenes look featuring two unique case studies where they're realizing the benefits of having smarter streets through a paperless right-of-way permitting. And we also have with us special guest Javier Lopez, Director of Oracle Spatial and Semantic Technology Group. And he's going to present his insights on what's going on with some of the industry trends and opportunities around this type of application. Now, just to level set, our goal is to have an opportunity for you to discover 5 important updates on how this cloud-based digital technology is providing the following capabilities. 1, how does it give cities the ability to coordinate, map, and respond to permits? 2, how does it streamline the permit process and ensure compliance? And how do we expedite time to review and approve event permits and identify potential conflicts? And from a very practical standpoint, support multiple file formats and attachments. We're going to be covering this and many other things. So let's get started and bring on our first speaker, who is Javier Lopez. And I think everybody knows Javier if they're familiar with Oracle and Spatial. And, you know, I've known Javier for many years. We were actually colleagues way back in the 90s when I worked at Oracle. But let me just tell you a little bit about him in case you're not familiar. He is the director of Oracle's Spatial and Semantic Technologies Group. And what he does is he handles and leads Oracle's efforts to incorporate spatial technologies across their database, application server, and business apps. He's also an author of a book on government spatial information policy, as well as over 50 scientific and industry publications in areas related to spatial information technology. So today, Javier is going to share a macro view on some trends around cloud computing in the public sector computing environment and what he's seen going on. So Javier, welcome to the webinar.
Great, thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd also like to thank Invista, Directions Magazine, and the folk at WebAttract for this timely webinar. I'd also like to thank all of you listeners out there for taking the time out of your busy schedules. So next slide. I'd like to introduce some of the major motivations for organizations looking to the web to license online mapping services, specifically cloud-based applications like the one Invista will be describing shortly. But before we introduce Mark from Invista, I'd like to take a few moments to explain some of the underlying computing and architectural changes that are motivating public sector organizations to implement these kinds of cloud-based permitting solutions. First, public organizations have traditionally deployed their geospatial applications using silos of dedicated hardware and software. These can include GIS systems, permitting systems, content management systems, and so forth. And many of these are single applications per silo, and that are sort of limited in terms of interoperability or in terms of scaling, and they can be expensive to manage because you've got many different systems, sometimes in different operating systems. And finally, it's difficult to integrate these various disparate systems necessary to carry out an effective permitting application, since much of the key data resides in different organizations and in different data models. But the permitting process is actually quite unique in the sense that there are many organizations usually involved in both the input and in the reporting. These can include various local government organizations, public works, public safety, planning, utilities, communications, and each of these organizations maintains responsibilities, and hence a piece of the information puzzle that's required to describe what the current and planned state is for a given section of infrastructure. So it becomes a challenge to integrate the necessary pieces of information that reside in these separate organizational silos. Each of these silos has their different data models and semantics, but yet it's necessary to collate them in order to understand what's going on in a particular place, either current or planned. So in many cases, field crews are necessary to access current information to support their jobs. Hence, there's an enhanced need for access to a permit system at any time from any device. So it would be ideal if all these relevant pieces of information could reside in or link to a consistent solution that could then enable secure access to all the key players that have valid access permissions to it. So it'd be nice to have all this capability in addition to other features like reporting, document management, and versioning could be supported. So how does geospatial cloud infrastructure address these siloed applications? First, it reduces cost. Cloud technology is generally paid incrementally, generally through monthly or annual subscriptions. This saves the organizations considerable upfront money on sunk cost of hardware software. There's also increased storage. Organizations can store more of their data than what might be available on a given private computer systems or borrowed servers across departments. It's highly automated, so no longer do IT professionals need to keep worrying about keeping their software up to date, and the costly pain and cost of upgrades goes away. There's flexibility because cloud computing offers much more flexibility than other computing models due to its scaling and the ability to evolve system requirements as user needs change. And there's more mobility. Employers can access information from wherever they are rather than having to remain at their desks. And finally, a cloud framework allows IT to prioritize its focus, no longer having to worry about constant server updates and other computing issues. These organizations are now free to concentrate on innovation. So by now, most of you have heard quite a bit of the hype and confusion about cloud computing services, but to help better understand, I'd like to focus on three service types that are generally mentioned. There's the application as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. Organizations like Oracle play a key role in enabling all three types of service. So, for example, Mark Fagan will shortly talk about the first one, an application as a service, and how specifically Invista's Smart Street application leverages key Oracle technologies such as Oracle Spatial in its permitting as a service capability. In the second category, platform as a service, Oracle recently announced that the Oracle Public Cloud, and this is a place for public sector organizations and customers to deploy their own applications. And finally, there's the category of infrastructure as a service where Amazon, which is a market leader in this space, offers developers and customers virtual access to hardware and software services. So let's take a closer look at what's under the hood of these geospatial cloud systems that can drive something like a permitting application. At the heart's technology platform that provides the necessary quality of service and grows and shrinks in an elastic manner to meet the changes in demand in your environment. So from a data management perspective, this means a scalable and secure database that can handle spatial data, imagery, documents. It can provide clustering technology that is leveraged to allow you to build pools of servers that can host multiple applications on a shared platform. This elastic nature can adapt to changes in workloads and continue to meet service levels. In addition, the quality of service goals are more than just about performance. It also includes capabilities like availability, security, and interoperability. As I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, the cloud offers a simplified pricing model that's quite attractive and convenient to public sector organizations. Users can move to a payment based on their usage. Pricing is generally undertaken through a subscription that incorporates only those services that a client requires. And in some cases, there may be an elastic consumption models that reflect actual usage. The point is that these pricing models are relatively mature and an efficient way to move forward on licensing these web-based applications. They also make sense to the public sector and utilities finances in this day of constraints on public sector finances. So to recap, a cloud service offers a cost-effective approach for bringing permitting applications online very quickly. It's a service that can be convenient, easy to use, and helps overcome many of the organizational and technical hurdles of integrating important but disparate data sets that generally reside in various organizational stovepipes. And finally, it aligns, it's a technology approach that aligns with developments on the web, with computing, and more specifically with general crowdsourcing processes that will enable information to be fed into systems both bottom-up and top-down using web technologies. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to Mike.
Thanks, Javier. That was great. You've already generated some questions, so we'll have you back in a bit in the expert section. But first, now I want to launch our first poll. So on your screen, you will see the first poll. And what I'd like you to do is to tell us, what are your biggest challenges with respect to your current right-of-way permitting process? And go ahead and select all that apply. Is it the inability to track and locate permit status? Is it the integration between departments and agencies? Is it manual paper-based processes? Or is it lack of one-stop shop for all right-of-way coordination? Go ahead and weigh in on this. And I see we've got quite a few of the people voting. We're going to keep the poll open a few more moments, and then I will go ahead and share the results. And then as soon as I do that, we will bring on Mark Fagan for his portion. And let's share the results. The first 50% inability to track and locate permit status. Looks like the majority say 70% is on integration between departments and agencies, 62% on manual paper-based process, and 49% lack of a one-stop shop for all right-of-way coordination. That's very helpful input. Thank you so much. Now we want to bring on Mark. And Mark is going to be focusing on Smarter Streets, Right-of-Way Permitting Goes Paperless, which is the title of today's webinar. And he is the co-founder of Invista, and he's the Executive Vice President of Product Management. And he's going to talk about how two cities, specifically Baltimore and Ottawa, are streamlining their permitting process and the lessons learned from their case studies. First, let me just give you a little bit about Mark. As the Executive VP and co-founder of Invista, his main focus, as I mentioned, is on product development, but he's absolutely passionate about helping customers realize the benefits of smarter streets, and we're really excited to have him. He is an industry pioneer. He also founded LEA Group's asset management software business, and prior to founding Invista, he was director of new initiatives at Reed Elsevier, which is Reed Business Information, where he oversaw product planning and strategic alliances for the construction products division for such products as cost estimating and BIM, or building information modeling product services. Mark, delighted to have you, and welcome from Sacramento to you in Boston, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. First, I'd like to just state that thrilled by the attendance, both in the U.S. and Canada, as well as the rest of the globe and all the countries represented. As such, I believe that, as indicated by the high attendance, it's an important issue, top of mind, if you will. And just by way of background relative to our company is formed by a bunch of industry software veterans, from building information modeling software to civil engineering to asset management and GIS. We come from such diverse companies as Oracle, Autodesk, Bentley Systems, and TomTom. What we're all about is the need to provide a interaction and communications between all the disparate players in the right-of-way, and in particular government agencies and utilities. And I'll demonstrate some slides subsequent to this regarding that. And as well, by way of background, our installations are telling. We're installed in cities as far south as Austin, as far north as Edmonton, from Washington, D.C. to Sacramento, and now we actually have installations in Al Ain, which is in the United Arab Emirates, to London. So really cutting across the globe at this point with a series of products that we're providing.
Thanks, Mark. So let's start by getting to the meat of today's topic, and let's look at both of your case studies and what we mean by smarter streets, and how forward cities are looking to realize the benefits of cloud-based permitting. We started off with Javier giving us an overview on some of the macro trends. So what I'd like you to do is to start with some of the right-of-way permitting challenges that you're seeing today. So why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, sure. So first I just want to give a little bit of background of all the products that we have in our company. And basically, the street corridor of the network is actually a convergence of many critical activities and operations. It's much more complicated than many assume. And we have utilities and their assets in the right-of-way. We have the roadway infrastructure. We have traffic and transit. We have special events. We have the permitting processes associated with all that, and then the construction management associated with that. And it's a complex interrelationship, and it really requires a cloud-based network with a geospatial component to properly do the coordination and management of all the activities and operations within the right-of-way.
So let's start with the city of Baltimore and give us a little bit of the background on them.
Actually, at first I just want to describe the various products that we presently have. So presently, with respect to the work within the right-of-way, as indicated by these graphics, is we provide utility coordination with respect to display of all disparate parties' projected construction projects and ways to collaborate and coordinate with respect to their construction. As well, we manage special events activities, everything from marathons to block parties. We have a component relative to emergency incidents. And the fourth component, which is going to be the focus of this discussion, is with regard to municipal consent processes. And for folks outside of Canada, I will be describing in more particular what exactly that is, but as well all the permitting processes and ultimately inspections management. And to the previous slides, all of these have an interrelationship. They're complex to manage, and we basically are providing that platform for all these elements management.
And now I'll bring up Baltimore for you, Mark. Go ahead.
Great. So the first case study is Baltimore. The city of Baltimore utilizes every single one of our products and has been for some period of time. And the first thing I want to address is this concept of what we call an ecosystem, and why it's important that our product is basically a cloud-based product, if you will. And I'll just read some of the players in this, but it's everything from the county of Anne Arundel to Baltimore Gas Electric, to the city, where we actually we work from the mayor's office to recreation and parks. That involves over 9 agencies and 11 departments. Where there's a county broadband initiative that's involved in this. Maryland Transit Administration is putting a new light rail system right through the center of the city. We have the PEPCO, which is again touches within this ecosystem, and finally the water system. So, to all intents and purposes, anybody who's doing any work within the right-of-way is in this ecosystem and coordinating and participating amongst themselves.
So I have your next slide up for you now, Mark.
Yep. So this is a difficult slide to realize, but I think it's a good example of the breadth, if you will, of the systems and information that we're managing. So this is one of numerous permit types that we're managing in Baltimore. They have different types, and this happens to be one where we're really cradle to grave with respect to a right-of-way. And I'm not going to go through every one of the blocks, but fundamentally it's everything from the intake or the application of the permit to the automatic distribution electronically of all the permit for the various reviewers. They digitally get a task assigned to them through email, and they perform a task and can also review digitally documents associated with the permit application. We also go through the processes of whether or not contractors are approved. We calculate the bonding requirements. We calculate what the fees are associated with a permit, and to the point to where we actually issue a physical permit, but again, digitally as well. And ultimately what happens is all this information is passed on to the Street Cut Work Inspections Division, who basically review the progress with respect to the work, from everything from compaction testing to steel plate locations and registration of steel plates, and ultimately through the warranty period, which is a year in Baltimore in this case, and ultimately we get to the point where we actually go to the release of the bond that's a requirement for the work. So it's an entire process that's supported digitally from cradle to grave, and this is just one of many examples. Most of our customers we discover have multiple instances of types of permits, and we model each one of their required types.
So let's talk about some of Baltimore's most vexing challenges. I mean, with such a complex ecosystem, I'm sure they're facing a number of challenges around permitting.
So, to Mike's point, some of the challenges we faced was relative to the diagram I just was talking to. Is there were two standalone systems that were basically the application management, which was behind the firewall network system, and a completely disparate system with respect to the street cut inspection processes. And there was no interface with them, and there was actually inconsistencies between the two systems with respect to data, which created quite a few problems with respect to management of those permit processes. And there were as well additional database merging needs and requirements that we basically assumed in the process. One of the other big problems they had is the ability to track and monitor, resulting in high volume of overdue permits. That is, permits where people didn't understand whose desk they were on. There was no way to audit and understand where they were, and basically this was resulting in long periods of time for the review and approval process. And as well, it cut across multiple departments and agencies, again, creating delays in these processes. And ultimately, it was a manual paper-based circulation without any prescribed workflow. So it wasn't very green, and it was expensive relative to producing a lot of the documents in paper.
So would you describe, what the solutions that you ultimately implemented and what helped Baltimore streamline the permit process so they were able to ensure compliance?
Yes, so what we've implemented, as I mentioned before, is one system is across all departments and agencies. Mm-hmm. We prescribe the workflow, so it is an ad hoc per se. It's known explicitly of who is performing what reviews and at what stages the processes are going through. We automated the workflow, so it's entirely digital, all based off of the internet and the cloud, eliminating the paper process. There's a capability to understand where any one of the permits are in their life cycle, to understand if there's any hang-ups or issues associated with that. And where we're going with this, and this is actually happening in Birmingham actually first, but where we're intending to going in other municipalities, including Baltimore, is starting to integrate some of the largest applicants. In this case, it would be Baltimore Gas Electric, or other large utilities where there's direct application by the utilities from their desktops and ability to understand where any one of their applications or actually street cut work events are occurring within the system, which is to drive efficiencies both for the utilities and for the municipalities. And as Javier was mentioned before, it's a web-based system, and I'm not exaggerating to say that people very typically are accessing it from any place, including homes in some instances.
So go ahead and talk about some of the results.
Yes, so as I mentioned, we've now prescribed the workflow process, and one of the things we intend on doing is to streamline that workflow process over a period of time to see where we can create efficiencies. The document management is digital, so the goal is to go completely paperless and to go green. One of the things we had to do in Baltimore, and this happens with any one of our customers, is everybody's got their own custom workflow and they have custom attributes. the number of attributes that we had to build for the street cut inspection processes in Baltimore is in the hundreds, if you will. But we've basically built our system to optimize implementing these custom systems for our customers. We're actually in the process of trying to manage the emergency permit situation. With blanket permits for emergencies is a necessity in municipalities, and what we're heading towards is ability to have the utilities actually participate in doing the location of cuts digitally within our system as opposed to a paper-based system. And ultimately, this could result in faster fee recoveries for the blanket permits, which are substantial in a city such as Baltimore. And the last point I'll just mention is relative to the utility coordination and special events management. If somebody applies for a permit and they're utilizing the functionality within our system, the system will automatically detect a conflict and prescribe a workflow for resolution of the conflict if they were trying to pull a permit in an area that is going to have a parade going through it at the same time, as a simple example.
So, Mark, we just, learned how the city of Baltimore, your explanation of how they were able to expedite their time to review and improve event permits. I want to segue to the other case study on the city of Ottawa. So two things. If you can give us a lay of the land in Ottawa, and also introduce how another application utilizing Invista's workflow process around pre-planning was done to use before permitting, which I think is pretty well known as municipal consent. So if you could focus on those two things.
Yes. So, to Mike's point, I guess basically with Ottawa, we were just in the initial stages of setting up our applications there, and what Ottawa is doing is a focus on their 5-year capital plan coordination, but as well the processes of municipal consent, which I'm going to describe in more detail on the next screen. I think that it's a very forward-thinking methods and processes, and as I mentioned, I'll describe those in a bit more detail. But first, I just want to describe, again, the ecosystem that compromises Ottawa. And it's everything from the telecommunications to hydro, which is the electric utility, to Enbridge, which is the gas distribution, and in the initial stages of implementation in Ottawa. And I repeat, we're in the just setup stage there presently. The 4 departments from environmental services to infrastructure to public works and the planning and growth management departments. So as the next slide comes up, I'll start to describe the concept of municipal consent for people not familiar with it. I guess the best way to describe it is what you not necessarily want to have, which is this image with the all of the street markings with respect to dig safe or misutility, and basically in the U.S. presently, the process is somebody goes and designs what their utility working drawings are going to be, and goes out and calls dig safe for these other entities and does the street markings. And that's the opportunity where you may run into or discover that you're actually infringing or going to disrupt some other utilities or municipalities' assets. Not the way that, not a very good planning method, if you will. The converse of that is the concept of municipal consent or design circulations. And the idea is, at some stage in the design process, 30-40% working drawings, design development, whatever term you want to use, that basically the person who is doing the designing, they delineate the area within the right-of-way where they're going to do the work. And what our system does is detects who owns any assets within the right-of-way. And the applicant uploads their drawings digitally into the system, and the system automatically distributes those documents to all involved parties. And again, there's a workflow process supported with them acknowledging receipt and review and identifying if there are conflicts with respect to it. And as well, it prevents an opportunity, which we have from some customers, of engaging what's called a joint opportunity, where possibly somebody might accelerate some work that they contemplated in an area and to get into an open street at the same time, which obviously is a huge cost savings. And another way to describe this is as well, this is also a precursor, and in many places it is a requirement, if you will, to the permitting processes. That is, in many municipalities, if you have not, based on the size, obviously, of the capital project, that if you have not gone through the municipal consent process, you can't pull a permit. It's a prerequisite, if you will. And typically that's done by time before the actual permit is pulled. So again, going back to the imagery, it's a way to really create a lot of efficiencies and save a lot of effort. There are some U.S. cities who are adopting some of this. The notice of intent is a practice adopted in San Francisco, in Chicago. They have these processes that are called existing facility protection processes or information retrieval processes, and these are early stage circulations of design intent in order to primarily save assets, if you will. So this is one of, again, I'm not going to read this in detail, but this is the workflow diagram with respect to the municipal consent processes in Ottawa. They have 3 different levels of circulation based on the size of the capital project. But again, where we work with the customer to identify what the workflow, and the intent is to clearly prescribe what it is and then automate the process. So that's what this workflow diagram represents, is that prescribing of the process and automation of it. So the issues in Ottawa is they are in, what they do is they plan their basically capital projects for 5 years going out. A lot of work and investments made in that, and they're in the municipal consent process, which has been a manual one up until this point. There was a bit of a disconnect from all the work that was done in the capital planning and being able to reutilize that in the circulation processes. So we're basically fusing, if you will, the information for both 2 different purposes and trying to create efficiencies there. There was a manual circulation process involving CDs or paper documents and mailings and those types of processes. Again, the intent is to go digital and to basically eliminate the paper-based circulations. And the intent is that the time frame for the circulations will be reduced by virtue of the automated processes and going digitally with respect to the document management.
So Mark, let's talk a little bit about the solution and what they implemented. Again, highlight some of the results. So you should have that next slide up for you right now.
So the first slide just represents a screen dump of our user interface with respect to the document management. We basically allow the users to do a simple upload of their documents. They can be, their documents are uploaded in a native file format. That could be AutoCAD or Bentley, DWG, DGN. It could be paper scanned imagery. It could be any form of digital imagery. It could be Excel spreadsheets. And we continue to store the formats natively, and we allow a process when we go through the circulations for reviewers to actually download the documents, and we have version control with respect to that if there's a markup process. And again, the idea is that we're doing the circulation across all entities, all departments, all utilities. So just imagine in a city such as Ottawa, how many different utilities and departments these processes touch, and to be able to do this in a sort of a real-time basis, and as well we create visibility, if you will, into who's done what review when, and so there's a clear understanding of where in the life cycle the review process is for any one of the reviews to understand who's done that. And then as well we provide a process for people to communicate through in the application directly through, if you will, sort of an email chat system that we provide. And the last one is, as well, what typically happens is the reviewers can provide in the circulation process, if you will, segments or the extents of where the projects are relative to describing their underground assets to provide to the applicant for clarification in their review and design process.
You know, Mark, I know one of the key points, and I mentioned this at the top of the webinar, we were going to talk about how you support multiple file attachments. Anything else you want to add to that, just to hit that one home?
You can scale the drawings, and there's markup capabilities associated with it, and as again I mentioned, just the version control. But virtually any document type required relative to engineering and design circulations is supported in the system.
Great, thanks.
And the other thing, as I mentioned before, with respect to Baltimore, but again, here's a screen, a representative screen of a dashboard, if you will, is again the understanding to identify where any applicant or circulation is in the process, where it is, and where there may be any kind of holdup, and methods to resolve those holdups. And the last thing I'll mention is one of our goals is we would love to determine in the instance that Ottawa is to identify what is going to be the hard and cost savings. It's a bit of a metric that's a bit hard to calculate, but it is certainly one of our intents to do that in the implementation presently in Ottawa. In the last screen with respect to Ottawa is again, the intent is to provide citizens engagement. What we do in our system is we provide a method to do a web-based real-time feed to public-facing maps. Typically, they're within the customer's municipality's webpage. It's a select set of information. It is any select set of information that the customer so chooses to present to the public with respect to what programs, capital projects, or circulations that they have in process. It's turned out to be a very beneficial product relative to our customers, evidencing the good management work that they're doing. So the expected results in Ottawa are that we go from a manual process to digital, that there's better visibility within what's a complicated process with multiple circulations occurring simultaneously, real-time analysis and reporting with respect to the expediting of the processes, and again, it's integrating these not only within the city departments but all these disparate entities such as utilities. And the last point I'll make is, again, being able to capture all the investment and information that have been gathered in the 5-year capital project planning, and being able to pass that on with respect to the municipal consent circulations.
Mark, let's move on to some lessons learned, and we've got quite a few questions in the queue for you and Javier, so I'll let you take this one.
Sure. So as you can see, one of the primary things we have with all of our customers is just to document and confirm their current state processes. One of the things we've learned is, walk before you run, if you will. It's model what your present processes are, and then address methods, possibly streamline processes based on the technologies that we provide. You think it's definitely important to identify and agree upon the business process improvements in basically the implementation. We found as well, if you will, somebody who's really a one-point source with respect to owning, doing the documentation and working with the implementation on the customer side is important. But as well, what we discovered is in the processes it's very important to involve the actual end users, the stakeholders who will be working in the system on a day-to-day basis, given input. Very often they have great insights with respect to improvements that very often might not be known across an institution. And the last is the concept of when you're training and actually rolling this out, get all the parties involved and do role-playing together. Just get everybody in a room and actually go through the work processes and the flows of the work and the notifications and what the review processes are, and it is a very productive method relative to a good rapid implementation.
Yeah, I like how you focus on the importance of the human factors, on getting everybody to get engaged and participate. That's extremely important. Well, let's take a few moments on how folks can get started if they want to go forward with something like this, and then we'll bring Javier back and get to some questions.
Yeah, so it varies by entity. Some people want to take on all types of permits. Others want to just do select permit types, but typically it's what departments and agencies and stakeholders you want to involve to just identify that, and then and typically quickly just to do a high-level diagramming, if you will, of the workflow and processes and abilities to identify potential improvements. This is true for regular right-of-way permitting processes as well as municipal consent. And it's helpful to determine, especially with digital document exchange, some volumes and types and formats. It may sound more complicated than it is, but it's not. But these are helpful in the process. It's not an absolute requirement, but can expedite doing that. And obviously, the last point is, it's obviously just simply contacting us to set up an initial meeting if someone is so interested.
Well, thanks, Mark. Folks, if you want more information, it's sales@invista.com. But what I want to ask first is, we have a question here, Javier. Will Oracle Public Cloud be available to customers in government? And there's a second part to that. And will that service offer Oracle Spatial too?
Absolutely. The Oracle Public Cloud that was announced a couple of weeks ago at Oracle Open World is now available to all customers, public sector and private sector. It's just important to remind that it's basic technology infrastructure. It's a platform. It's not necessarily an application, but it's a platform upon which these customers can develop those applications, and it does include the Oracle Spatial option.
Great. And Mark, here's a question. How long does it take to implement the permit workflow solution?
It varies remarkably with respect to how many permits and the relative complexity, but typically, and frankly, the actual physical implementation for us to set up the custom attributes and workflow is not the driving factor. It is typically getting the customer to document their existing workflows. It's rare that we see a situation where there's already an existing document and a complete understanding of all the involved participants and the stages, and the actual time to do that diagramming is not a lot. It's more, frankly, getting the focus of our customers to do that. It can happen very rapidly, and sometimes it could be a matter of weeks, just with as I mentioned before, with the level of complexity and the number of participants that need to be involved.
Okay. Mark, here's another question. It's from Greg. It says, the permitting processes may differ significantly amongst public agencies. Do participating agencies need to change operational and council processes to match the system? For example, like an SAP deployment, or is it flexible enough to be modified to suit our individual processes? And if you need me to repeat it, just let me know.
No, I clearly understand it, and that is absolutely the case that we see is everybody does things differently. Everybody's got a custom method for doing it. Does the process happen in parallel, or does it happen in series? Or there one person is only allowed to approve versus multiple? Does it it's hard to imagine all the different methods people employ, and we've worked really hard in developing our system to accommodate all the nuances and different methods that our customers have. So I can say unequivocally, it is not one where we're prescribing processes for customers. It is just the opposite. We're accommodating those processes, and as I mentioned before, we typically just model what the present ones are to get going, because people who are presently doing that work are familiar with those processes, and subsequently do the streamlining and changing of methods to improve efficiencies.
Great. Here's another one for you, Mark, from Will. It says, existing utility assets, what degree of buy-in do you need from utilities?
So I guess with respect to municipal consent versus permitting. In the permitting one, if I'm understanding the question properly, we definitely see utilities see huge benefits of being able to be more involved in the process and understanding where, especially utilities that have large volumes of permits and systems. And so, as I mentioned, in the Birmingham area, we've got the utilities being directly involved with the municipal municipalities' permitting systems. So there's a direct involvement there, and transparency and ability to do direct application. So that's so there's an incentive, if you will, for the utilities to do that. It's not a requirement. There's still the traditional method of doing a paper-based application, which needs to be transcribed at the permit desk, but that's the direction people are going. And as I mentioned before, this, especially with the blanket permit stuff, with digitally locating where street cuts are, is another area of utilities involvement. In municipal consent, again, the efficiencies are such that the utilities really have a strong incentive to be participants. If they so choose that they want to continue creating manual versions of their documents, and then the municipalities have the burden of either manually circulating those or converting those digitally, and then putting the rest of the processes in the workflow digitally. It's not an optimal situation, and what we've been seeing is typically there's so much benefit that all parties go in. We really haven't seen a situation where that there's some are out, if you will. It is to say it's not impossible, but again, the benefits are such that we typically don't see that to be an issue.
Good. Thank you for such a thorough answer. And as long as you're up, here's one, and maybe after you're done, if Javier wants to jump in. How do you manage spatial documents or drawings, some of which may be georeferenced and others that have no coordinate system?
Yeah, it really does vary. People best practices. There's people who located all their assets in GIS systems, to the gate valve or whatnot, and can geospatially give a representation to people who still have paper-based information, and where they're basically scanning a section from a paper-based product and basically associating it with the extents of the projects that we geospatially delineate in our system. So that is when, say, if it's area in the right-of-way, whether that's municipal consent circulation or if it's actual construction permit, what happens is we digitally locate the extents of that, and we georeference that location. And then when the actual permit circulations occur, that geographic representation is actually what you get in an email. You actually see a map with the extents of it. And we give the lat long, and we give the address information associated with that. And if people have their existing assets information already geospatially referenced, they can associate that versus, again, more of a manual process where they're either scanning or referring to a CAD document that is in the general vicinity or the encompassing vicinity that they then upload and make part of the circulations.
Javier, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd agree. It's the geocoding of the document is a key part there, and how you want to geocode it will depend on the kind of presentation and analytics you want to do or search metrics. So you can, as I was mentioning, to geocode to the extent of the document itself. It might be a center point. It might be the lat long of features on the document itself. But the key thing is to have metadata that contains a geocoding element so that it can be searched in the spatial database. It could be a buffer query saying, show me all documents pertaining to this particular pipeline, and so the spatial query will take into account those documents. Those are common kinds of queries that are possible and are very powerful in a document type system that's spatially enabled.
Got it. As long as you're up, here's another one for you. Question is, this approach of having multiple public works and engineering organizations collaborating and hosting of spatial data in the cloud seems compelling. Can Oracle Spatial support this for 3D data too?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Oracle Spatial product manages 3D data types. So in addition to the 2D geometries that you're familiar with in GIS, it can also store 3D data types like BIM models, point cloud data types, terrain data, 3D terrain, 2.5D terrain data. So as customer applications move from the 2D planar environment to truly into a 3D environment, this becomes very critical for a lot of the engineering, planning, permitting, and design. than being able to just simply grow the system to go from a 2D to a 3D. And that's one of the other advantages of a cloud-based system is it's designed to evolve. Its elastic nature, not only in terms of scalability, but also in terms of features as well. So as content or data becomes richer, as BIM, building information models, become more and more used and more mainstream, then they can become part of the design document that is used for decision making.
Perfect. That's a great segue for the next question for Mark from Tabitha. Mark, how is data entered into the system from existing applications?
So basically what happens is the applicant delineates, geospatially where the extents of whether or not it's the permit or the circulation. And what happens is the people who own assets or the reviewers required by the prescribed workflow receive a notification. And what happens is that notification has a URL that it automatically launches our system and takes the reviewer or individual to the exact points in our application relative to that project. And the user has the ability to just simply state what type of document they want to upload, and they're pointing that to a directory in their system. And it's a simple process of just pointing to an existing file and a directory and then doing an upload, and it can be multiple documents and as mentioned with all the various different types.
Great. Well, we're just about at the top of the hour, and before we sign off and get some final housekeeping, Javier and Mark, I'd like you both to take a few moments and share any final thoughts you might have with the audience on what you'd like them to take away from today. So let me just start with you, Javier, and then we'll go to you, Mark.
Okay, great. Yeah. First, I'd like to just thank everybody for joining this afternoon's call, and for some of you this morning. Thanks again to the organizers. And I'd like to reiterate that these cloud-based systems are now ready for prime time. The Invista application here, in particular, with permitting, sort of illustrates the kind of focused application that can be enabled and deployed in the cloud, and helping to overcome some of the organizational issues that make traditional permitting so difficult across organizational boundaries.
Thanks, Javier. Mark?
I just want to reiterate my appreciation for the participants that are attending. I'm looking at I have the opportunity of looking at the list. It's a very high number, and I as well just want to point out that we're very excited about about the interest that's being expressed in these new products. It seems to be an important issue for a number of our existing and new customers. And the last thing is I'm especially excited about the adoption of the municipal consent, and really interested to see its possible adoption in countries, multiple countries beyond just Canada, because I think it's a really good practice, a really good idea, and I think huge benefits accrue to anyone who uses this in their planning processes.
Well, thanks, Mark and Javier, and of course to everybody who invested their time with us today. We appreciate it. We know you've got multiple choices of how you're going to spend your time. And just a couple thanks to the WebAttract production team of Patty Van Hooser and Lori Durman, and from Invista, Lynn Wigan, for their behind-the-scenes collaboration and support. We really appreciate everybody's time to put together another great webinar. And thanks for joining us. As your moderator, this is Mike Agron saying, have a great rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing you on an upcoming Invista webinar. Bye for now.